Hi, my name is Jonathan Skinner. I am a social anthropologist, and I would like to talk to you briefly as a taster on ethnography and ethnographic research in particular. And the session is on ethnography in practice from overview to possibilities. So giving you a quick overview on the history of ethnography in terms of it being an anthropological research method, especially developing through the 20th century and moving into advanced ethnographic techniques in the 21st century, where we have advanced elicitation techniques using digital glasses, for example. So what is ethnography? If we look at the etymology of the word ethnography, it refers to people and writing. Ethnos, people, graphics, writing. It is of the writing about people and different peoples. It is anthropologists going out into the field and writing about the people that they are working with and studying. It is a practice that started in the early 20th century. There were periods of fieldwork in Victorian times that predate Bronislaw Malinowski, but Malinowski is known and renowned as the anthropologist who ushered in a fieldwork revolution, one that disavowed previous armchair versions of anthropology, where the anthropologist sat at home and gathered in information from civil servants, missionaries through the empire. There was an expedition from the Cambridge Anthropology, Zoology, Biology unit that had an expedition through the Torres Straits. However, it was not accepted disciplinary practice until Malinowski was working in the Trobriand Islands as a Polish anthropologist and got stuck in the start of World War I in 1914 and ended up spending not just 5 or 6 months doing fieldwork, but 7 years. And when he came back and wrote up his fieldwork experiences, he quite naturally spun this to his advantage and coined the long-term participant observation as being the modus operandi of modern anthropology in the 20th century. Here he is sitting with some natives, joining in with their ritual practices, and he is celebrated as being one of the founding fathers of the discipline, though his reputation has become tarnished with the publication of his diaries and his letters from the field, which undermined his more scholarly academic publications by showing the disparities between what he was writing about in terms of the Trobriand Islanders and then what he was actually thinking and how he was referring to them in derogatory terms. The point I'd like to make from this slide is that there are two working understandings as to the craft of ethnography, and that is the practice, the going to the field and doing the field work amongst the people with the ethnos, and then there is also the product, the ethnography, as in the monograph, the text, and there is slippage between the two, to go and do field work, to do ethnography, but also to write an ethnography, a monograph. So he was someone who was stranded in the Trobriand Islands, and he coined this long-term approach to field work as a new way of researching, of getting involved with your subjects, of being a participant as well as being an observer in the field, hence the expression participant observation. There are some more contemporary versions of this participant observation, this technique of observing and participating, of being present but also being slightly distant and detached as the participant but also the observer, in the sense that Pierre Bourdieu, French anthropologist and sociologist, wrote about participant objectivation, of trying to be involved and a participant, but also trying to objectify that participation, that subjective positioning and involvement. because the participation is involved and embodied and part of the subject matter that you're studying. The observation is more sort of detached and observational in sort of a scientific sense. And it's that duality between subjectivity and objectivity that Bourdieu was trying to chart a middle passage. In the field of dance anthropology, in the anthropology of dance, the formula is spun on its head, and the participant observation is referred to as observing participation. The second word is generally considered to be the most important one. So you're participating, but observing. The stress is on the observation here in the classic anthropological sense. As an observing participant in dance anthropology, it stresses the importance of being involved, of dancing with the people that you're working with, to understand the physicality, the nuances, the centripetal and centrifugal forces, the proprioceptive feelings, etc. Malinowski coined ethnography and published extensively his two classic works of the 1922 Argonauts of the Western Pacific and the controversially titled The Sexual Life of Savages in 1929. And within these texts, he was writing about society from the bottom up, from the perspective of the people, looking up, looking outward, trying to fathom their worldview, trying to understand, to use his expression, to grasp the native's point of view, his relation to life, to realize his vision of the world. Not exactly politically correct, but the point is trying to put yourself into the body and the mind of the people that you're working with, to understand from their point of view. To not do that is to sink into the criticism of being ethnocentric, of making value judgments on people according to your own stance and standpoint, your own centrism, shall we say. So in terms of looking at the world, the social anthropologist is looking at it from the local perspective. From phonemes and phonetics, from linguistics, we take the emic approach as in to characterize this bottom-up native point of view perspective, how local people think and how people categorize the world, as opposed to a more ethic perspective coming from phonetics, referring to the more scientific detached generalizations of human behavior. So the perspective is looking for individual instances, looking for patterns, trying to distill from that the sort of the guidelines, the cultural moralities and customs and practices. And it comes and it works from that rich, nuanced detail of being there, being involved, being a participant observer, as opposed to setting up an hypothesis and testing it, and making generalizations from the behavior that are tested and confirmed. So Malinowski was interested in documenting social life of the savages, referring to it as the sexual life of the savages, rather controversially, and of looking at everyday life from their perspective, looking at the imponderabilia of everyday life, trying to make sense of it from their perspective. How do they exchange currencies? How do they barter and trade? How do they relate to each other in terms of their sociality between different communities? And that ethnography was picked up not just in anthropology, but also in related disciplines, sociology, with other people starting to conduct long-term sort of serious invested engagements in the community. William White and the Chicago School of sort of urban ethnographers, William White producing the Street Corner Society, standing on a street corner looking at and documenting life going by, the hustling, the pimping, the banter, the relations of these citizens on an everyday street, and writing up rich, detailed accounts of life from the perspective of those living on the street. The bottom slide shows American 97% poor, 1% rich. David Graeber, a controversial Marxist, anarchist, and anthropologist, died recently over the summer. He coined the expression, "We are the 99." And you might say that the imponderabilia, the native point of view, is one that's looking for that 99%, the general social practices and social lives of those on the street corner, for example. More contemporary definition and understanding of ethnography. Ethnography is the study of people in naturally occurring settings or fields, to sort of bring in Bourdieu's fields to some extent, by means of methods which capture their social meanings and ordinary activities involving the researcher participating directly in the setting, if not in the activities, being involved in that, in order to collect data in a systematic manner, but without meaning being imposed on them externally. So it's about, to some extent, following your nose, letting yourself adrift, hanging out on the street corner. Liming, for me, working in the Caribbean, to lime is to hang out on a street corner, watch life go by, to try and look at that social field in front of you. That is your laboratory of people going about their everyday life, and to try and understand it and what people's intentions and motives and practices are, and to sort of look at it over a long period of time, so you get a sense of consistency, and you get the patterns, and you get to understand people from their perspective, and you get a sense of coherence about the material, because you are following them over the longue durée, over a long period of time. Typically, the anthropologist is looking for the annual cycle, 12 months being a typical ethnographic period of time. Hammersley and Atkinson, we select particular features and instances and identify them as somehow characteristic or representative of places, person, or event. We endow particular fragments of observed and reported life with significance, precisely in the way we choose and present them as examples, as illustrations, as cases, or vignettes. So we might work with a scenario or an event and try and extrapolate from the bottom up, from the particular to the general, as opposed to working with the general and seeking the sort of the particular from it. So in terms of trying to sort of establish a sort of a scale of involvement as a participant observer, you might say that there is a continuum, that you have from one extreme the complete observer, the person behind the mirror, the sort of TV detective interview scenario with someone watching from behind the one-way mirror, the invisible role of the researcher, to the observer as the participant, as someone who's known doing overt observation, but maybe around the sort of sides of the classroom, looking at pupils and how they interact with each other, trying not to get too involved and trying not to bias their work. To the participant observer, as I mentioned before, the sort of the pseudo member of the group or the community, the token person who's involved, where the research role is known to the local people, and over a period of time they become accepted for what they're doing. Svetlana Todorov makes a point that it is an assumed proximity to the people that you're working with as a participant observer, that you are projecting upon yourself as the anthropologist. I went to the island of Montserrat for 10 months. A volcano erupted towards the end of my fieldwork, and I'm writing about life as it was pre-volcano on the island. And there's a sort of sense of I am the person characterizing myself as the anthropologist in the community, as a part of the community. And there's a license that I'm giving myself to that position. And then to finish off the continuum, there is the participant. There's someone who's gone native, so to speak. Thinking of my dance anthropological research, most nights I am dancing in the community, doing salsa dance, long-term research projects, interviewing lots of people, dancing with them, trying to understand their work and involvement. And then occasionally some nights you just go dancing. You have gone native, you are no longer taking notes, interviewing, taking examples. You are a participant, and you've gone wild. You've gone rogue in your anthropology, and you just had a good night out, as opposed to gaining field notes and interviewees for the research project. The usefulness of this type of ethnography, for me, it holds a lens up to the world. It gives you insight into people's motivations, their customs, their behaviors, why they're doing something. It allows us to make sense of the world because we're making sense of their practices from their perspectives. Edmund Leach is an anthropologist, a sort of structuralist anthropologist, who had a nice sort of expression phrasing this as ethnography. It makes the strange familiar and the familiar strange, in the sense that we start to understand what are seemingly strange practices. Why are people having carnival practices every Christmas on the island of Montserrat? Why is this being staged? What is the importance of these eclipses? To spend time with the singers and the dancers, it starts to become more natural for the anthropologist. They start to make sense of it, and so the strange becomes familiar. And by so doing, the familiar, our own familiar practices start to become strange, as we start to bring back our anthropology from the fieldwork experience back home to try and draw comparisons and also contrasts. The carnival that I was involved with on the island of Montserrat, how similar is that to the Friday night out in the Empire amongst my dance friends? Is this a familiar night that I can start to think about in terms of making it strange, trying to understand it in terms of the carnival, just as I tried to understand the carnival on the island of Montserrat? So the usefulness of ethnography is to give you this bottom-up perspective. It's typically context-rich. It tries to look at local perspectives, local point of view, local knowledge, as Clifford refers to it. It's typically characterized by long-term participant observation, and that is the sort of the luxury, labor and financially intensive version of ethnographic research. The more practical, the more consultancy, the more applied anthropology would be a reduced time frame. We don't have the luxury of spending a year in the field. So some anthropologists now work in terms of rapid ethnographic appraisal, REA, in terms of parachuting into a community, working in groups and teams, or working on a specific topic, using surveys, questionnaires, and then focus groups and one-to-one interviews to try and get a perspective on that local knowledge. So I'll stop there with this introduction, and I will explore more advanced techniques of elicitation in terms of ethnography, digital ethnography, and other case studies in our sessions.